Chilean authorities find possible debris from a missing Air Force plane. The president of Cuba holds talks with the new president of Argentina. And Iran reacts to the most recent unilateral sanctions imposed on them by the U.S. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo and this is From the South. The Chilean Air Force has said it located debris believed to be from the cargo plane that crashed this week with 38 people aboard. The debris was found 30 kilometers south of where the plane last made contact. The parts were being recovered for analysis to determine if they belonged to the Hercules C-130 cargo plane. The aircraft disappeared shortly after taking off late on Monday from the city of Punta Arenas. Authorities concluded the aircraft must have crashed early the next morning, although the cause of the crash remains unknown.
So far, we have not found anything that shows these are remains of the fuselage or the plane. There are always things out at sea. Therefore, each of those things that can be seen, detected, have to be checked. It has to be corroborated.
On Tuesday, a new session was held in the Venezuelan National Assembly in relation to new cases of corruption involving the group of opposition members connected with Juan Guaidó. All of this is taking place just 1 month ahead of an election to choose the next president of the Assembly.
National Assembly member Juan Guaidó is dismissing some members of the Comptroller's office. He claims that they were supposedly favoring businessmen connected with the government. The lawmakers which form the commission, which is investigating corruption within the supposed humanitarian aid debacle, say that Juan Guaidó wants to cover his scandals with this false allegation. They've uncovered yet another illegal act carried out by the associates of the self-proclaimed figure.
4.5 months ago, I swear on my 6-year-old daughter, I asked Congressman Juan Guaidó, in the presence of 10 congressmen in the Sari Tower, to remove the secretary of the Comptroller's Commission because he was like a madman with that seal that it is the United States handing out letters to extort businessmen.
They also point out that Freddy Superlano of Guaidó's party and the former president of the Comptroller's Office of the Assembly was the person responsible for the theft of these seals and is the same lawmaker who was involved in allegations of corruption, drugs, and prostitution with money from the supposed humanitarian aid.
Freddy Superlano was accused of stealing the seal of the Comptroller's Commission of the National Assembly and to have distorted businessmen.
There are children today starving to death because of corruption. It's a horrific scandal that the children are suffering. Rafael Ramirez is corrupt. It's a horrific scandal that there is no medicine. And with respect to that, this management is investigating it. Thank you.
Divided, the opposition parties with more lawmakers, the so-called G4, also failed to comply with the agreement for the forthcoming election of the Board of Directors, which will take place on January 5th.
There is an agreement that they themselves signed when this legislative period began. According to this agreement, the year 2020 would correspond to the so-called minority parties. But as I have said before, there is a problem with how they distribute the booty. This group of 4 opposition parties now wants to have exclusive representation of the opposition, and they are mistreating the minority parties, which according to their own agreement should have the position of president of the assembly in the year 2020.
This soap opera promises new chapters, characters who move in a plot that destroys the image of those who presented themselves once as saviors of the homeland, but who are politically hanging by a thread and with less and less international support in their coup plot. In a fragmented state, the opposition are headed towards next year's legislative elections with great difficulty.
Festivities in Argentina continued into the night on Tuesday, celebrating the official transition of power to the government of President Alberto Fernandez. These were scenes of revelry in Buenos Aires as thousands filled the historic Plaza de Mayo to mark the beginning of a new era. Many also expressed joy at the end of Mauricio Macri's time in power, a period that left the country dealing with runaway inflation, a colossal debt with the IMF, and over 40% of citizens living under the poverty line. Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner took to the stage to deliver her first speech in her new role of vice president.
I want to tell you that I know that these past 4 years have been very hard for many people. Jobs, salaries, poverty, hunger. I know that these 4 years have been difficult. They were also difficult for those that were subject to persecution. They wanted us to literally disappear. They humiliated us. Nonetheless, in spite of all of that, we are here. And I want to tell you that we are here not because of magic, but because we have come together as millions that believe that a better country is possible.
President Fernandez spoke after the vice president and paid tribute to her deceased husband, former President Néstor Kirchner.
It's a splendid night for me, in which Cristina and I can speak with you all about everything that's ahead of us and about what's to come. I thank God, because one day, destiny made my path cross with Néstor Kirchner's.
Me cruzó en el camino a Néstor Kirchner.
That night, when I sat down for dinner with Néstor Kirchner, I never thought that my life would change the way it did. That the door would be open for me to be a protagonist with him. It's the biggest adventure that any politician can have, bringing their people out of disaster and onto their feet, raising the flag of workers, production, freedom, and democracy.
The new president of Argentina held a meeting with his Cuban counterpart on Wednesday. During their talk, Alberto Fernandez and Miguel Díaz-Canel highlighted their desire to strengthen bilateral relations between both nations, in particular regarding trade. After the meeting, the Cuban president spoke with survivors of the former clandestine detention, torture, and extermination center of the Mechanic School of Argentina's Navy, where thousands of people were detained and disappeared during the military dictatorship.
Yesterday, Argentina had a different sunrise, and today, that sunrise has even more light. You are now building a road to return hope to the Argentinian people, but all of Latin America is walking beside you on that road. Argentina's victory is our continent's victory.
Mexico, Canada, and the United States signed a new North American trade agreement in Mexico City on Tuesday. It allegedly supports labor rights, but still requires domestic approval in the U.S. House of Representatives.
We have a great interest in this deal having the support of U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and for the deal to be approved by different political factions in the U.S., some being against it, the impeachment and its effect. And if President Trump wants a medal for the deal, this is what the markets were concerned about. The media, and us too. That's what's important. And if the deal is ratified in 2 months or 2 weeks, that's not what matters here.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursday, only on LS1.
Welcome back to From the South. Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Brown has announced that Harvard University in the U.S. will work towards a joint program with the local Five Islands campus of the University of the West Indies. Brown had written to Harvard's president, Dr. Lawrence Bacco, and said he has since received a positive response. The move is in acknowledgement of the prestige university's benefits from slavery on the Caribbean island after receiving a donation towards the Harvard Law School from a slave owner. Talks on the way forward will be held in January 2020.
To believe that better is coming.
Barbados Prime Minister Mia Motley has reiterated her country's commitment to the fight against climate change. Motley tweeted the reminder as she planted a tree during her visit to the United Nations office in Nairobi, Kenya on Wednesday. She noted that Barbados is committed to planting more than 1 million trees over the next year. The African Forum on Peace and Security has started in Egypt. African leaders met in the city of Aswan for the official opening of the two-day forum focusing on sustainable peace, security, and development in the African continent. The forum will also discuss post-conflict reconstruction, education, climate change, and sustainable development issues on the continent. Speaking during the summit, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari attributed conflict in Africa to climate change, while also highlighting the importance of conflict prevention and resolution.
The effect of climate change, we are at the root, of some of the conflicts in parts of the continent. This is why we must focus on the issue of the recharging of Lake Chad, which used to provide livelihood to over 40 million people in the region. It is difficult to expect durable stability in the region without the restoration of the shrinking lake.
Parts of South Africa have suffered torrential rain for 8 days. Poor communities living in informal settlements were the hardest hit. Our correspondent Matua Malachi went to see how those communities are trying to rebuild their lives.
We are now in the aftermath of flash floods that wreaked havoc here in Mamelodi and other parts of the Gauteng province. But we are now in Mamelodi, where people behind me are trying to rebuild their lives. And just before where you see people here, there's a stream that was way above my head 2 days ago, which is what caused the disaster that you see behind me. I'll get out of shot for a bit just so you can have a perspective of exactly what I'm talking about. But what you are seeing now is people trying to rebuild their homes with corrugated iron. And that's what most people here do, because these are migrants. Most of these people are migrants from other provinces in the country. And this is why people end up in places that are not habitable, actually, because the government has warned people about living next to streams like this one, because they burst the banks and end up flooding their homes, which is a serious danger to human. What you see here, it's a humanitarian crisis, because earlier we were right there with the people, and everything, people only have what they've got on their backs, and they've lost everything, their documents and their clothing. And it's an act of providence that it's now time for school holidays, and so children will not be needing to be going to school with their uniforms and so forth. But we have a lot of destitute families living here in this part of Mamelodi who have nothing and nowhere to go, and that's why you see them rebuilding exactly the same place where it's actually very dangerous to live for people. But some people we hear have been accommodated across the street at the nearby Baptist church, and we suspect that's where President Cyril Ramaphosa will be making his way to come and see the devastation that we've witnessed here today. It's back to you, studio.
We thank Matua for that report. The Democratic Republic of Congo has launched the third phase of a measles immunization campaign across the country. The government is working with the World Health Organization to roll out the vaccination program, which is targeting 18.9 million children by year end. Apart from Ebola, measles has killed 5,000 people this year in the DRC, many of them young children, with more than 250,000 suspected cases recorded in 2019.
This campaign is meant to deal with the disease that is ravaging our children. The government organizes measles vaccination campaign every 3 years. Now the campaign was a little late, but with the measles epidemic ravaging our city, they have been able to organize. That's why you see the mothers who came to vaccinate their children.
Peace talks between Sudan's government and rebel groups have restarted. This is a ray of hope for many who wish for a deal in the next 2 weeks to end the years of conflict after rounds of talks mediated by the African Union previously failed. The peace talks began in October in South Sudan with an aim to put an end to conflicts in Darfur, Blue Nile, and South Kordofan, where rebels have fought bloody campaigns against their marginalization by Khartoum under ousted President Omar al-Bashir. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Earth. Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur. Welcome back to From the South. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says his country will overcome the latest sanctions imposed by the U.S., either by bypassing them or through negotiations. Washington imposed new sanctions on Iran's biggest airline and its shipping industry, accusing them of transporting lethal aid from Iran to Yemen and weapons of mass destruction and proliferation. Tensions soared between both countries last year when President Donald Trump pulled the U.S. out of Iran's 2015 nuclear deal, reimposing sanctions.
The exchange that took
Iraqis remain on the streets of the capital, Baghdad, as they maintain their call for change to the country's political landscape. Citizens are cleaning up a zone that was once filled with frustrated protesters who were met with violent police repression. Last Friday, gunmen killed 21 people in the nearby Tahrir Square demonstrators and are calling for the reforms to the political system as they are upset over the government's graft on sectarian politics, while the deadline for the country's parliament to nominate a new prime minister is looming.
We will continue with this revolution. We have been here for more than 30 days. I came from Babylon. Since the 1st of October, they have been firing bullets at us, and we were not scared. We will continue, even if we stayed here for 100 or 2,000 days. That is until they find us a solution. We don't want them. We want the regime to be changed. The government is lying to us in public.
Why are the activists and protesters being killed? Is this peacefulness? We have nothing but the flag. They come wearing black shirts and park their black cars with their faces covered, and they kill the people. They are killing protesters. He's a protester, and this is a legitimate right in all the countries.
The Indian Parliament has just passed a controversial citizenship bill as protests against it continued for a second day. The bill grants citizenship to minorities facing persecution from 3 neighboring countries, but does not include Muslims. 125 members voted in favor, while 105 opposed the bill. The new legislation has been criticized for violating the country's secular constitution by granting citizenship to minorities from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan while sidelining Muslims.
If India is a democratic country, if constitution is guided with no bias to any religion, why should there be a citizenship bill with a particular mention, it's only for the non-Muslims, means Muslims are categorically excluded from it.
So if you try to give a message through this bill that Muslims have lesser rights over India, have lesser claim than other religions, this is a very significant message that you are changing the very essence of Indian citizenship, which didn't take religion into account. It was a secular concept, but now you're making it religion specific.
On the 7th day of large-scale transport strikes, commuter chaos continues to grip France. Citizens have once again had to wait in long lines to board overcrowded trains to the Paris suburbs during rush hour. Earlier in the day, French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe defied unions and announced the government's intention to overhaul the pension system. The Prime Minister said that the implementation of a universal system will mean the end of 42 existing schemes, adding that a minimum of 1,000 euros would be guaranteed per month and that the retirement age would remain at 62. Unions and protesters have responded by rejecting the proposals. Although moved from the climate venue in Madrid, Spain, demonstrators protested just outside as delegates took part in the COP25 climate talks. More than 100 activists briefly blocked the entrance to the plenary meeting this Wednesday. Ministers are struggling to agree on rules for a global carbon market and possible ways to compensate vulnerable countries for disasters caused by global warming. 4 years ago in Paris, world leaders agreed to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. But scientists say this is unlikely unless drastic steps are taken. Islamophobia has gained strength over the past few years in Europe, just as far-right rhetoric continues to spread through the region. But in Andalusia, Spain, some are trying to fight back against xenophobia and hate of Muslims.
Yusraf is a pianist. She's Spanish from Moroccan descent and composes music against hate. She uses herself as an example of coexistence in the face of those who try to separate people through Islamophobia.
I guess people are afraid of what's different and their first reaction is rejection. But at the end, we're all the same. And just because we're from a different religion or ethnicity, it doesn't make you as a person any different. What's important is to get to know Islam.
Islamophobia is rejection, aversion and hostility towards Islam and everything relating to it. This racist rhetoric affects the everyday life of many people who often see their rights to work and housing be attacked.
Housing becomes an issue because it can be very difficult to rent an apartment if you have a certain last name. Tuition becomes another issue due to discrimination. On social media, you can clearly see the level of hatred that exists amongst people today.
The constantly growing far-right has been using Islamophobia as a tool to divide people and generate hate that ends up in violence.
We are very worried about Islamophobia, just as any other form of intolerance that has spread in Europe. This is the result of far-right rhetoric that end up in hate crimes against religious and ethnic minorities.
Andalusia opened the first National Congress on Dismantling Islamophobia, a space for reflection that can help define new ways and strategies against Islamophobia in Europe.
Wednesday was the final day of campaigning in Britain ahead of Thursday's general election, and leaders were all seen making the most of these final hours. Opposition Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn began the day campaigning in Glasgow, where he told supporters that a vote from the Scottish Labour Party would be crucial for a Labour victory, and Prime Minister Boris Johnson made pie in Derbyshire. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn addressed supporters at campaign stop in Middlesbrough.
We're a more divided society than we've ever been. Are we seriously going to allow this lot back into office to create more division, more poverty, and more desperation in our society? I want the legacy of our Labour government to be the creation of a national education service. Every school to get an apprenticeship and go to college or go to university, don't have to go into debt to get an education. We will therefore end
We leave you with a tune by UK hip-hop artist and activist Low Key on the election, which takes place tomorrow.
December 12th, change the world. Sell the NHS, that's what Boris wants. He doesn't even have to lie, they just fob it off. They haven't got the honesty, but they got the bots. Policies that kill, they're not telling you the proper cost. More corporate violence, that's what Boris wants. Contracts for affairs, relationship was on and off. The robber boss won't even cover what your coffin costs. Policies that kill, we can't bring back what was lost. There's murdering, is murmuring, is churning grins harmful. Interrogating several ways a journalist can't do. Liar in the booth, a million examples. As trustworthy as the BBC is impartial.
Discover the cultural diversity that defines a continent.